Early on in 2020, I remember telling my wife, I said, part of me just wants to close the curtains in the window, shut the computer off, and come back in 5 years and let's see what happened. Close your eyes and just, put your head in the sand. And, here we are 5 years later.
Dr. Peter A. McCullough is a renowned internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist based in Dallas, Texas, with over 1,000 publications and 700 citations in the National Library of Medicine. He is one of the most peer-reviewed cardiologists in America and a leading expert in cardiovascular and renal disease. Formerly Vice Chief of Internal Medicine at Baylor University Medical Center and professor at Texas A&M University, Dr. McCullough gained prominence during the COVID-19 pandemic for his early treatment protocols, critical perspectives on public health policies, and advocacy for transparent health policies. He hosts the McCullough Report on America Out Loud Network, delivering insights from experts in medicine and policy.
It appears as if we've uncovered a deeply held religious belief, particularly among doctors and nurses, that vaccines are in a sense like a talisman, like they provide some type of protection against a foreign invader like a virus. They're accepted based on faith, that's for sure. They're not based on evidence. A medical doctor, quote, promoting the vaccines can't cite a single prospective double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial that ever showed that the vaccines reduced the risk of hospitalization and death. I never received a single email or a text message saying I was wrong from any of my colleagues. They literally just ghosted me. I didn't realize that I had internal courage where other colleagues didn't. There's no checkbox on a medical school application for courage. I don't consider myself intrinsically brave.
Joining me now is Chief Scientific Officer from the Wellness Company, Dr. Peter McCullough. Thanks for joining us on the Ballsy Show. You've been a man who quite literally has stood up against it in very, very tough times through the COVID period. Can you just give us a little bit of a rundown as to how those early years were when you just decided to say, hey, I'm going to stand for something here?
Most people know me for my work in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. I was not going to allow the medical community to, disappoint or, fail the community of people who needed treatment. So I was the first to publish the McCullough Protocol, the most widely used approach to treat ambulatory COVID-19. It's been credited with saving millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations. Huge capstone in my career. I was the first public figure in the world to question the COVID-19 vaccines prominently in The Hill, which is a widely read journal by the House, the Senate, and the White House. That was in August of 2020. You can't find a single Australian or anyone in your part of the world who actually questioned the vaccines. The world had been, in a sense, seduced into a mass trance. Everyone just thought, based on a false narrative, that the solution was mass vaccination. I saw it differently, and boy, was I right, I made the right call.
Well, you were. The key question then is, why didn't no one else stand up? I'm based in Australia, obviously you're over in America. Why didn't we see any other people go, you know what, stand for something?
I think a lot of people were genuinely afraid. I think that was a category where they truly were fearful. They said, listen, I'm not going to stand up. I'm seeing loved ones die with this illness. I'm certainly going to get in line here. I don't want to be the next victim. I think there was genuine fear. I think there was also a great concern about professional reprisal. People thought, well, geez, if I get out of line, it could hurt me professionally or economically. I could lose my job. I think the third area, and this is common, is people in general don't want to take intellectual risks. If the entire group feels in one direction, the vast majority of people are going to go with the group. People, they don't want to stand out and be an outlier. And so I think a lot of it was driven based on these motives. And, a few of us, I didn't fall into that category. I was early on, and during the pandemic, I already was, a very prominent doctor in the United States. I just finished being a guest lecturer in 2 divisions at Harvard. A named visiting professor. I'd lectured at the European Medical Association, the FDA, New York Academy of Sciences, Australia, New Zealand. Cardiology Association in Canberra. I lectured in Auckland City Hospital, all over Australia. People knew me at University of Sydney and all over. So I was in a position of strength to begin with. And when I made the call, I made the call. And there were a few key people who followed me. One in Australia was Nobel laureate Dr. Robert Clancy, for instance. There were some real standouts. But the rank and file disappointed me, and they left their patients to sadly die of the infection in some cases and then be injured by the vaccines.
You're a man that's massive on data and obviously studies. You're the most peer-reviewed cardiologist from what I see and what I've read over the journey. What was it? Was it data? Was it gut feel? Was it a combination of both that you went, that's it?
Combination. Most doctors in my academic circles, they don't see patients, so they quickly become out of touch. Our last several FDA commissioners, heads of the National Institutes of Health, CDC, they're out of touch. They haven't seen a patient. In fact, there's no public health official in any country, present or past, that has ever seen and examined a COVID patient and treated them. Not a single one. Most of the major medical media commentators have never seen a COVID patient. They've never seen a patient injured by the vaccine. So clinical experience, hands-on, seeing patients. I'm in my office right now in Dallas, Texas. That was a huge advantage. And, as you mentioned, I have over 700 listings in the National Library of Medicine. The average professor of medicine in your country is 25. So I've seen and examined more data sets. I've published more. I've considered more hypotheses. And so I had the unique ability to make the right calls clinically, both on treatment as well on vaccine safety and now detoxification.
Yeah, and you went reasonably early too with your own protocols, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, but they were quickly banished. Any reason why?
There seemed to be a global suppression of treatment. Part of the McCullough Protocol I became most impressed with was nasal sprays and gargles. They had a bigger impact than ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. They really did. Prospective randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial by Baumforth and colleagues with a xylitol-based nasal spray reduced SARS-CoV-2 infections by 71%. It was better than almost anything I'd ever seen. And the nasal sprays continue to perform. Gargles, there were inpatient trials. They were suppressed. In the United States, there was a prominent Federal Trade Commission against one of the big companies. They tried to crush them for doing research with nasal sprays and gargles. Hydroxychloroquine was crushed in the United States and Australia. Ivermectin, it was worse. Ivermectin had a very prompt effect, safer than Tylenol. And one of the big advocates, Dr. Pierre Corey, published a book, the best title ever. It's called The War Against Ivermectin. The regulatory agencies launched a war against it. In the United States, the American Medical Association launched a campaign in the fall of 2021 to abolish the use of ivermectin. Now, this is an FDA-approved drug. We're using it for a very, very sound clinical off-label indication. It's generic, safer than paracetamol or acetaminophen. Why would the AMA want to abolish it? Why was Paxlovid undermined? Why were monoclonal antibodies? These were expensive, high-tech, Operation Warp Speed drugs. They were undermined. Every attempt to treat patients was undermined. I think there's only one answer, is that by design, the public health authorities wanted one solution and one solution only. That was mass vaccination.
And there's a lot of money associated with that, I assume. Is that all this is about, do you think?
No, listen, the monoclonal antibodies were very expensive. There's a ton of money in them. They were pulled off the market as quick as they came on the market. They worked great. They reduced mortality. So it couldn't have been about money. It couldn't have been about money. It had to be some motive. You'd have to ask somebody, why was vaccination the featured approach as opposed to treatment? Because we had to treat the vaccinated anyway. The vaccines didn't work, so they needed treatment. The unvaccinated needed treatment. But why was vaccination the selective approach? It still is today. Do you know not a single country has pulled these vaccines off the market? Not a single nation has initiated a safety review. Not a single regulatory body has opened the vials to inspect them for quality, purity, contaminants. It's an astonishing observation. It's been going on 5 years now. The world doesn't want these shots. People aren't taking them. Governments are buying them. And sadly, they're having to pour these vaccines down the drain because nobody wants them.
Yeah, well, you say that, and absolutely the same thing happening here in Australia. And if you're pregnant and you haven't had a vax, they're still saying it's safe to get one. But if you've had one before, not. But if you're under 18 and you don't have any health issues, they're now suggesting that that's not safe for 18-year-olds. Or sorry, not safe's not the right word. It's not recommended. And that was quietly pulled from market about 30 days ago.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so it's not a case of you can't get it, but there's still the promotion. There's still the talk. The doctors are still pushing it. Why is this? Do you have any idea?
I have a book coming out. It's titled Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. It appears as if we've uncovered a deeply held religious belief, particularly among doctors and nurses, that vaccines are in a sense like a talisman, like they provide some type of protection against a foreign invader like a virus. They're accepted based on faith, that's for sure. They're not based on evidence. A medical doctor, quote, promoting the vaccines, can't cite a single prospective double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial that ever showed that the vaccines reduced the risk of hospitalization and death. There's no valid non-randomized studies. And that's the last false narrative that's being held out there. I recently testified in the U.S. Senate, May 21st, 2025, and the final false narrative put forward by the ranking chairman, Senator Blumenthal, and his witness, which was Governor Josh Green of Hawaii, was that the vaccines saved millions of lives. They're not denying that the vaccines are dangerous. They're not denying the fact that the vaccines cause heart damage, blood clots, cardiac arrest, and death. But they're making some type of perverse argument now that somehow it was worth it, that we had to trade lives with the needle in order for some population benefit. And there are no credible studies showing the vaccines saved millions of lives.
You said you saw it, you saw the effects, myocarditis, atrial fibrillation was one of the ones mentioned, pericarditis. The risk v benefit before COVID, obviously, I think I've seen you say that you were supportive of flu vaccines, but has your overall perception changed from what you've seen the last 4 or 5 years?
It has. The idea is if the world could fall for a COVID vaccine, have we, in a sense, been deceived on other vaccines? And our research for our book, again, it's on Amazon. You can pre-order it. Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. First author is John Leake, a brilliant historian. Is that, it's been several hundred years of vaccines being presented, as being very safe, very effective, essentially untested, bold claims. From the very beginning, there's been a lot of money in vaccines, a lot of power from the very beginning. And a lot of its administration is fear-based. Here, take a vaccine, otherwise you could be crippled with polio. And then we got to the point in the last 20 years, vaccines became mandatory to attend school or university, get a job or the military. So you can see that vaccine mania has been on an ascendancy now for several hundred years. It just walked us right into this COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, probably like you, I took all the vaccines. I didn't question them. I didn't push them. It wasn't an area of study. I didn't question them. I was never harmed by a vaccine. But now that we examine it, like the flu shots, I took 40 flu shots, 40 of them. Yeah, I was to be on medical staff. Do you know there's prospective randomized data showing that if you take these flu shots, you do reduce the rate of influenza a little bit, no protection against hospitalization or death, but you have an increased risk of getting the common cold. And that was what's happening with me. I was on primetime TV and people say, Doc, you're sick all the time. And I think it was all these flu shots. So I stopped taking them. I haven't had a flu shot in 3 years, and I'm finally getting my health back.
You've spoken in the past about long COVID. It's used as if, and I had COVID not long before I was terminated from my employment within about 24 hours or so. But you talk about the long COVID situation, and the public perception, particularly in Australia, is, I've just got, I've had it in my system, I got long COVID, it's flattened me for a period of time. You have a different take on it.
Well, we're studying long COVID, and there is a cause for long COVID, and the cause is the spike protein. Here's the virus, and the spine on the surface of the virus gets stuck in the body after the infection. We can find it in tissues. The antibodies to the spike protein are markedly elevated. That's what causes long COVID. It's similar to getting Lyme disease, where the proteins from the Lyme organism, Borrelia burgdorferi, get stuck in the body, or syphilis. These are examples where there's some infections with their long effect in the body. The spike protein is the cause of long COVID, and the vaccines superload the spike protein in the body. So many people with long COVID have taken the vaccines, and because the vaccines don't work, now they even get a very severe case of long COVID because they're loaded with the spike protein.
Talk about standing up. What was it like to be a professional at the top of the tree, standing the fight, and then having what would have been workmates or colleagues or respected foes who you're in the industry with instantly, effectively, I joke about it, now I've got rabies, because of your views and how you're not going to go along with that narrative.
I never received a single email or a text message saying I was wrong from any of my colleagues. They literally just ghosted me. They just ghosted me. In fact, my direct supervisor, when I was at a major, academic medical center in Dallas, that later on sued me in court. But my superior physician, he was a co-author with me on the McCullough Protocol. And we had big grants together. He saw what was happening to me, and you know what? He said, if you're going to do this to Dr. McCullough, I'm retiring. I'm gone. I'm out of there. So one of my biggest allies, he just retired and said, listen, later on, congratulate me on the book, because he's in the book as well. But look what happened. I mean, I came out as I testified in the Senate in 2020. I was the first to treat COVID. Many were telling me I was a hero to bring this innovation to the world. Others followed on to give credit to other groups treating patients. In 2020, when I testified in the Senate, I was told, my hospital administration took half the day off, and they were cheering. They'd never had a doctor from our medical center get to the point in the floor of the U.S. Senate and present good news that we could treat COVID. But within 3 months, I was marshaled into a room and said I was told my contract was not going to be renewed for no reason. And the contract wasn't going to be followed. So the contract was worthless.
If you strip it right back, what do you think it was that made you stand?
I mentioned fear to begin with, and I had fear as well. I had fear of the virus early on. I've had patients die with COVID-19. I was fearful for my parents, my elderly parents, my wife's parents. I was fearful that something could happen professionally. Believe it or not, early on in the pandemic, some of my colleagues at academic medical centers were asked to take pay cuts because they didn't know what was going to happen. So the first reflex by the administrators was cut the doctors' salaries, and they got their salaries cut. So I didn't know what was going to happen. I had fear. But uniquely, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to overcome it. And in many ways, I didn't realize that I had internal courage where other colleagues didn't. There's no checkbox on a medical school application for courage. Being a doctor is not a particularly courageous job. It's not like I'm a a military infantry or the police or fire, wearing a white lab coat and seeing patients in the hospital office, it's not too courageous. I don't have to be physically that impressive. I've never shot a gun. So I don't consider myself, intrinsically brave. But I have to tell you, when I saw patients who are being denied treatment, saw pharmacists, with desperate patients, and they refused to administer hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, colchicine, budesonide. I saw patients desperate to get monoclonal antibodies, and they kept being withdrawn. And then I saw people forced into mass vaccination. I concluded something very bad is happening. Whatever is happening, it's happening worldwide. It's global and it's simultaneous.
Yeah, it certainly does appear orchestrated, doesn't it? You pretty much touched on your mindset at the time, but it's not just you who has to go through this. I've been through a similar situation, but different situation, but my wife and my kids have gone through it. How was your family affected?
I felt fortunate. My kids were already fully grown and had made it through professional school. My son's a young doctor. He's married. My daughter's an attorney. My wife and I were, led a conservative and cautious lifestyle, so we weren't financially over leveraged, and we could take setbacks. But probably like you, I've lost several jobs now for no reason. Each time contracts were not honored. And, I've been entangled with legal fees and battles for 5 years now.
Does that look like ending?
There appears to be no end in sight. There's just no end in sight. Constant investigations, inquiries, defamation, slander, professional injury, over and over and over again.
Do you get to a stage where you just think, I've had enough of this? Or is it just like the more it attacks you, the more it makes you stronger?
Early on in 2020, I remember telling my wife, I said, part of me just wants to close the curtains in the window, shut the computer off, and come back in 5 years, and let's see what happened. Close your eyes and just put your head in the sand. And here we are 5 years later, and it's still going. It's still going. And the best analogy I can give right now is that if you and I, in 1950, had a concern that smoking caused lung cancer, let's just say we had that concern, like Sir Austin Bradford Hill in the UK, and we went into Harvard or University of Sydney, you pick your university, Monash. If we went into those universities and said, hey, everybody, we're worried smoking causes lung cancer, we would be told, don't worry about it. Smoking is safe. We smoke. The nurses smoke. Our patients smoke. We would have just been ignored, brushed off. That, don't listen to these overly concerned non-smokers. In 1964, Luther Terry, Surgeon General, compiles the Surgeon General report on smoking. He calls all the chiefs of medicine to Washington, says, listen, I've got bad news. Smoking causes lung cancer. You should have seen the looks on those faces. It will come to pass when we do have that reckoning, and the medical orthodoxy will be called, and they will understand the vaccines are dangerous. They've resulted in large numbers of injuries, disabilities, and deaths, and they're on the wrong side of history. I think sadly, many doctors know that right now. You can't find a single chief of medicine in the United States coming out on TV saying, listen, the vaccines are a good idea. We should continue to take vaccines. No. The doctors who promoted vaccines are now shamefully silent.
Those same doctors appear to have failed with informed consent too, by the looks of it worldwide.
They didn't follow the fundamental principles of medical ethics. Declaration of Helsinki says that we have to have full informed consent. Do you know there was a slide circulating at the National Institutes of Health in September of 2020? This is 2 months before the vaccines come out. The slide says the expected side effects of the COVID vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, are heart damage, myocarditis, blood clots, paralysis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the list goes on and on. They knew. They knew ahead of time. None of these were listed in the consent form originally. And even today in the consent form, nowhere in the consent form does it say that the vaccines can cause a fatal side effect. They says, well, the vaccines can cause myocarditis. They just don't tell the victim that they can die of myocarditis. That's mandatory. And we have hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed, autopsy-proven cases, biopsy-proven, adjudicated. The vaccines cause fatal myocarditis, and not a single manufacturer nor the regulatory agencies will disclose that to the next person taking a vaccine.
What about the information people are saying, and medical people can say, oh yeah, you can fix myocarditis? I've heard instances where people say, no, you can't, and then others say you can. What do you see?
Depends how much damage there is. Now, Dr. Jenna Schauer published 2 papers early. Some of the young children, if you take the left ventricle, the major pumping chamber of the heart, greater than 15% damage by MRI is considered a large area of damage. That can actually, lead to heart failure. She was describing 20 to 25% regions of damage in the left ventricle. My experience is those don't come back. Now, smaller areas, less than 15% or even less than 5%, the body can heal that. And I saw a patient today where it's less than 5%, but we can see it at MRI. And I told him, I think you're going to be fine. Now, the mechanisms of healing involve 2 major treatments. One is McCullough Protocol, base spike protein detoxification. That's use of 3 natural products, curcumin, bromelain, and nattokinase in a combination at high doses for a prolonged period of time, over a year. And then 1 prescription drug called colchicine. Very important. Colchicine is derived from the petals of a purple flower. It's an anti-inflammatory. It's mandatory for myopericarditis. That combination together, in my experience, patients do reliably get better. They don't slip into heart failure, and they don't get a cardiac arrest.
That was going to be my next question, because there's probably a lot of people who, my audience, some people will be awake to this issue. Other people are going, well, I did it to keep my job. I did it to pay the mortgage, get the kids through school. Or the various pressures people were under would come back to money. So there is a way for someone to detox, or is it a constant thing? Or, the positive side to this? Because obviously there's a negative side, as we know. There's been loss of life and serious injury, but you think there is a way to help people detox from this situation?
Right. Well, first off, the early vaccines were far more dangerous than the later vaccines. So 2021 was a very bad year. It'll be the highest mortality that we probably will see in our lifetimes. But things are getting better. Those who've had COVID several times, myself included, those who took the vaccines, they should take base spike detoxification. If you search McCullough Protocol in Google, there's 5.6 million hits. If you type in Amazon spike detoxification, a zillion things come up. You can find it all over in Australia, New Zealand. I think you can buy from the wellness company. If you go to twc.health, I'm the chief scientific officer. We have the lead product, which is called Ultimate Spike Detox, a lighter product called Spike Support. If you want to do this on your own, just get over-the-counter nattokinase, which is derived from chickpeas or soy, bromelain derived from pineapples, and then curcumin derived from turmeric. And that triple combination reliably helps the body degrade the spike protein over a long period of time. The antibodies come down, the clinical syndromes resolve, the blood clots dissolve. There's plenty of studies now to support this. I have direct clinical experience now in thousands of patients, and I'm telling you, I'm confident that this approach works. It takes a long time, probably over a year. We tell people don't stop after a couple weeks, go for a year, and if well tolerated, continue indefinitely.
Well, that's great news. I did hear you touch on then quickly, you said that there are a lot more, well, I'll use my terms, don't understand the medical side, but you're saying the early vaccines were a lot more toxic, I'll use the word, more so than later. Can you explain that? Like, it's not the same product.
Well, the virus that came out of the Wuhan lab, the spike protein was deadly. And the vaccines copied the code for this deadly spike protein. It's called the Wuhan spike protein. So anybody who took Pfizer, Moderna, or AstraZeneca in 2021, they got a super dose of the protein that was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the biosecurity level 4 annex. In a sense, they received a biological threat, a laboratory-derived by method of injection as a vaccine. It's a terrible thought, but that's exactly what happened. Now, later on, the virus mutated. The spike protein became far less dangerous. The big shift was when it went to the Omicron spike protein. And then when the boosters came out in 2023 for Omicron, the vaccines became far safer. Now, they're not perfectly safe, but they're far safer than they were before. And by the way, virtually every first version of a vaccine is not so safe, and then future ones become safer. That happened with smallpox, with pertussis, as well as with polio. The early vaccines had big safety problems, later ones safer.
Do you see the trust in medicine going from people?
Plummeted. There are patients that are very frail cardiac patients. They were told to take a shot that causes heart damage. They're outraged right now. There's patients who had prior blood clots. I had a patient today. He had a prior blood clot in 2016. He was told to take shots, and that caused blood clots. In fact, he took 2 shots. He got a blood clot, and they told him to take a 3rd one. And then the blood clot shot to his lungs. This type of advice is so reckless. It's so antithetical to good clinical care. And it violates the Hippocratic Oath, which says, above all, do no harm. Patients are furious at doctors and nurses and public health officials and employers who promoted these vaccines.
You say there'll be a day of reckoning. Do we see a Nuremberg Part 2 ever in this instance?
I don't see it that way. I went to Nuremberg a few years ago to learn more about what happened. There were about 70 Nazi doctors on trial, and I think only just a handful of them ultimately received the death penalty. They did horrific experiments on detainees in Nazi Germany. And, I was in the courtroom where it was called the collection of records, and you can go through them. Do you know what the most common excuse the Nazi doctors had, when they were questioned in court? I was just following orders. That's what we're going to hear. People are going to say, I was just following orders. I was just following someone else. A couple of years ago, I visited Australia. I went to Canberra. I went to the upper and lower house of parliament. I met different Australian senators, on both sides of this issue. And in one of our meetings, we asked one of the senators, what information did you rely on to adopt the COVID-19 vaccines in Australia? You know what they said? They said, we relied on the American FDA. The CDC will say they relied on the WHO. So everyone is going to point in these different directions. Do you know our US CDC is on record? They never said to mandate the vaccines. So when it comes down to it, they'll try to blame an agency. They said, we didn't say to mandate it. The US FDA never said to mandate the vaccines. I mean, this type of madness is extraordinary. In May of 2021, after trying to conceal this safety signal, this just recently came out at my U.S. Senate hearing, After trying to conceal the safety signal, the FDA and CDC come out with a warning. Pfizer and Moderna cause heart damage. They cause myocarditis. And the warning is as plain as day. It hits people who are young men. 90% are men. It actually tends to hit athletes. Do you know it was August, just 3 months later, the U.S. sports teams, including the NFL, mandated the vaccines? Why? They had no reason to. The U.S. government had not yet mandated the vaccines. The Biden mandates came in November of 2021. Most employers started mandating the vaccines after there were clear safety concerns and without any type of government backing.
They've also got the courts backing them too. I know that too well.
Well, they do now. They do now. And so there's court cases. One of in my circles is a young man in his 40s. He's married. He has 3 children. He takes the Pfizer vaccine and he just dies in front of his kids on the living room floor with a cardiac arrest. Autopsy proves a fatal vaccine effect on his heart and lungs with pulmonary hemorrhage. Published in the peer-reviewed literature. And his wife now is left as a widow with 3 young daughters. And she's taking the case to court. Now, what angle is there? Pfizer is immune from liability due to the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act in the United States and from the PrEP Act, which covers anything used during the pandemic. But she's taking a different approach. She's actually suing the employer, which is a large employer. It's Caterpillar. They make farm equipment. And the legal standard is that Caterpillar substantially encouraged him to take this shot. So an employer that substantially encourages somebody to take a vaccine that's not safe, that's not effective, that no one could have known if they were going to work, no one could have known if they were safe, that entity, in this case Caterpillar, in this case is alleged to have some responsibility. I can tell you as a doctor, I never encouraged patients to take these shots. I was neutral on them for about 3 months. And then when I was asked to testify in the Texas Senate, by that time we had 1,600 Americans who had died with these shots. And I came out in the Texas Senate and I said, I am concerned. And I pressed my case. Within a few weeks, Tucker Carlson, who had the #1 show on Fox News, had #1 show on mainstream media, called me and said, you have to come on my show. And I went on his show. I went on the long program. Tucker went on a tear. Before you know it, he lost his job. Yeah. Joe Rogan said, I have to have you on my show. I set all the records on Joe's podcast at the time. Joe's Spotify contract was threatened. There was all kinds of controversy there. Novak Djokovic said, listen, I'm not taking the shots. And you know what happened in Australia with him? #1 tennis player in the world. Probably our best quarterback a few years ago was Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers said, listen, I'm going to take the McCullough Protocol. Joe Rogan took McCullough Protocol. Said, I'm not taking the vaccine. And they put a yellow band on Aaron Rodgers. They banned him from meetings. They chided him. Even former NFL great Deion Sanders, Dallas Cowboy, he promotes the shots, to take the shots. And he already had a lower extremity vascular problem from a prior injury. He had a toe removed previously. He takes the shots and he gets showers of blood clots down his legs. He gets multiple amputations. He nearly lost his entire leg. And he's in a wheelchair. And Deion Sanders, before that happened, he was berating Aaron Rodgers, saying that Rodgers is not a team player. He should take the vaccine for the team. It's the only way to be safe. I mean, people lost their minds on the vaccine. They really did. My favorite college football announcer, Kirk Herbstreit, former Ohio State great, he has COVID. He has long COVID. He's tweeting about it. But he takes the vaccine. Then he gets blood clots. And now he really threatens his life. Al Roker, my favorite weatherman on Good Morning America, he takes the vaccines publicly. Then he gets COVID because the vaccines don't work, and then he gets showered with blood clots. And it just keeps going and going. Eric Clapton gets a neuropathy, can't play the guitar. We have Damar Hamlin has what is ostensibly a vaccine cardiac arrest of Buffalo Bills on primetime TV. You have Justin Bieber has a vaccine facial paralysis syndrome called Ramsey Hunt. His wife, Haley Bieber, has a blood clot, shoots to their brain, has to have it retrieved. Tampa Bay Bucks coach Bruce Arians hospitalized with myocarditis for a month. Jamie Foxx, somebody I know most of these people now. Jamie Foxx, I told him not to take the shots. Invariably he did, has a cardiac arrest and stroke, and he's hospitalized for months. I mean, the list goes on. And virtually none of these public figures will come out and admit it. If they do, like Eric Clapton, Eric was slammed. Other people soft pedal it, like Megyn Kelly, who now has an autoimmune disease from the vaccine. Many just stay silent. And I did a Twitter poll on this. I said, why aren't these public figures coming out? And the answer is, they're afraid if they tell the truth, they're going to lose even more.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. There's a lot who sit quiet. RFK seems to be, from a distance, all the way over here in Oz, seems to be trying to make a difference in health. What's your take?
Brilliant political strategy of Make America Healthy Again, MAHA. Who couldn't get behind that? I think that probably helped Trump win the election. I think it was a brilliant approach. You know, the Secretary of Health and Human Services is one of the 15 cabinet members in the United States. But in general, it's not a position that receives much notoriety. Can you even think of any prior secretaries of HHS? Yeah, do you see what I mean? Well, the one during the Trump administration who ushered in the vaccines, that was Alex Azar. The one through the Biden administration was Xavier Becerra. But essentially, they are people of little note. RFK comes in, you know, a storied family. Sadly, his father was our Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. He's assassinated. His uncle John F. Kennedy is assassinated. Kennedy's one of 11 children, and you know, a storied career as a litigator, a not-for-profit leader. He led the Children's Health Defense, and you know, he's installed in office. Now, he's somebody I know. I've been on his podcast. He clearly knows the COVID vaccines are not safe and effective. He didn't take the COVID vaccines. By the way, in the Trump administration, prior to Biden, there was only one cabinet member who didn't take the shots. Only one. And do you know who it was?
The boss.
No, Trump took the shots. The only cabinet member who didn't take the shots is the doctor, and that's Surgeon Ben Carson, who was the secretary of. And so Ben's a personal friend. He told me, he goes, I wasn't taking these shots because I got a lot of pressure. There's no way, they weren't safe. So, you know, Ben Carson was a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. He has a brilliant medical career. He saw it. I saw it. Some of America's best doctors saw it. Some of the doctors, you know, more mediocre and below, they couldn't see it. They were just, you know, following the herd. But Robert F. Kennedy comes in with an agenda, and he is shaking things up in Washington, but he's been noticeably silent on the COVID-19 vaccines. In fact, there was an odd press conference where the National Institutes of Health, as well as the FDA leaders, with Robert F. Kennedy, announced that they were going to stop recommending the vaccines for children and pregnant women, which it sounds like that's happened in Australia. And they published kind of new guidance in the New England Journal of Medicine. They still arrived at the conclusion that a third of Americans should be taking COVID shots. Now, the irony is less than 15% are. So it's obvious, you know, these regulatory officials are out of touch with what reality is. But anyhow, at the end of the press conference, Kennedy says, and with this change, we're going to make America healthy again. So think about that. Less COVID-19 vaccination is going to make America healthy again. Well, how about no COVID-19 vaccination? That'll make us really healthy. So it was just the oddest situation. So people can't figure this out. You know, there's kind of three power positions in the United States. who could pull these vaccines off the market. The companies should pull them themselves. AstraZeneca and Janssen, they already pulled their vaccines. They caused blood clots. They already pulled them. That's the responsible thing to do. Pfizer, Moderna, and Novavax in the United States, they could pull their shots off the market. They could say, listen, we've analyzed it. It's not safe. We're pulling. They're not doing that. They're not holding any roundtables on vaccine safety, no discussions. The government contracts continue to go through. And by the way, the government contracts remain lucrative because no one's using the vaccines. The vials just get dumped down the sink. It's a complete waste of billions and billions of dollars. Now, the power positions that could pull the vaccines off the market currently are President Trump, Robert F. Kennedy, HHS Secretary, and FDA Commissioner Marty Makary. If I had any one of those positions, I would have pulled them off in 2020. Gone. If I was in the Biden administration, gone. I'm big enough and I'm strong enough to say they're gone. Sorry, they're not safe. I've made the call. Someone's got to make the call. You know what I mean? Recently, you probably saw in the news where President Trump made the call to drop bombs on Iran nuclear facilities. Yes. And there was all this discussion and consternation. And Trump just stepped up. He said, I made the call. I made the call. Well, when it comes to the COVID vaccines, one of those three has to make the call. But not a single country has had a single leader who's made the call. And so that's the interesting observation is, really? There's 194 countries. I think there's 140 countries that had enough money to buy vaccines, and nobody can make the call to stop this?
Begs the question, doesn't it?
It's a stunning observation. How about no safety reviews? Really? No one? Not even Robert F. Kennedy can order a safety review of the COVID vaccines? How about inspecting them? We inspect food, we inspect over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, we inspect other vaccines. But why are the COVID vaccines not subject to any type of quality, purity inspection?
The only thing that can come back to it is money.
Well, they're not being used, but the purchases are still going on. So you could have something there that, the vaccine manufacturers and their subcontractors. And by the way, the companies don't make their own vaccines. They're all made by biodefense contractors. Like Moderna, they don't make their own vaccines. Moderna is like a marketing shell. And same thing with Pfizer. Moderna's product is made by a biodefense contractor called Resilience. So the money flows down to these subcontractors. But really, are these companies so powerful that they command the entire world? There's some countries that are not so wealthy. They could probably do a lot of good with that money if they spent it on something else.
Absolutely. Well, that opens up another Pandora's box, doesn't it? I know you're a busy man, Doctor. Appreciate your time. The Wellness Company doing wonderful things. I'll put your link below for our podcast listeners, and also this will be going up on YouTube as well. But I appreciate your time. What is sort of late afternoon your time, early my time?
Great. Yeah, I've got to check on a few more patients, but thanks for having me on. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Make sure you follow me, certainly at the Wellness Company. Go to www.twc.health/courage. Follow me out on social media. I've got the Top Doctor Specialty account there where I see patients on Twitter, True Social, Getter, Gab, YouTube, Rumble. Make sure you check out my new book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, available on Amazon. Subscribe to my Substack, Everyday Focal Points. This is the leading biomedical Substack out there. That's where you get all the citations. You know how I cited the data today? It's all in Focal Points Substack. And, check out my podcast, America Out Loud Talk Radio Pulse, as well as McCullough Report. And lastly, support the McCullough Foundation, McCulloughFND.org. That's what supports all of our work in the media, communications, time spent like this. It's all the McCullough Foundation. Go to www.McCulloughFND.org. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Doc. Thanks for tuning in to The Ballsy Show. We'll have another episode up there soon. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so you can comment below. And if you feel like supporting us, you can also donate us a coffee. That link's below. Thanks again.